Hello, everyone. We are already live, Peter, and welcome, Peter. Welcome, everyone, to Insight. I'm so glad to have you here today, and you and our audience. Thank you, those who joined us last week, and apologies for the technical issues. Nothing under our control. So Peter and I are so excited to, finally be here live. And so as many of you know, if you've been joining Insight before, so you know that the purpose of this podcast is to demystify all beliefs that we usually have within the organizational world and the society in general. So that's the main purpose of the podcast. So I always use the analogy of, it's like having an onion, and so we start like peeling the layers one by one. Is something like we do with all the meats that we usually talk about in the podcast. And I'm also excited because this is our first English spoken episode. I was sharing this with you last week, and I'm very excited for that. And today we will be talking about how fast can we drive personal change as leaders. And let me clarify this. Probably it's obvious, but I don't want to assume. So we're not talking about how leaders drive change for others or massive change. So we are talking about how do leaders manage their own behavioral changes to succeed in their careers or their lives. And there are so many beliefs around that. So I think some people think that for personal change to be real, to be profound, and also sustainable in time, so it has to be hard and needs to take longer. So, for instance, it seems that when we have changes that happen fast, and we will clarify what do we mean by fast. When we have changes that happen fast, or in a easy way to say in some way, they don't last or they are fake, right? Unless we are talking about those like rapid changes after traumatic events in life, which is not the topic for today. But for me, one of the main questions when I was actually looking for someone to talk about this is if it's possible to speed up the process. And that's why I decided to invite Peter to this episode. I was sharing with you last week that when I read Peter's profile in LinkedIn, I said definitely this is the guy. So I need to talk to him, and I was sharing with you actually what it says. His profile it says, I help aspiring leaders set up in their careers in 6 months or less and develop unshakable confidence. Leadership coach, speaker, love playing golf. So I'm sure you agree with me. So when you read something like that, it's like you cannot, you are curious definitely in terms of, I want to know more. So how those changes can happen fast, and also not only fast, but also you mentioned in your bio, I will read it in a minute, that those changes happen fast, and you said I will read it something like like easy. You use the word easy. Not sure. I will read your bio in a minute. So that's why I decided to invite Peter, and I'll let me introduce him formally. So Peter Carius is a leadership coach helping aspiring leaders to set up in their careers and develop unshakable confidence. Before becoming a leadership coach, he held a global management position at Rolls-Royce, where he led a multinational team and negotiated complex transactions worth billions of dollars. While living and working in 7 different countries, he began to notice patterns of both success and failure. People that excelled in their lives and careers share common behaviors, attitudes, and strategies. He pursued more formal education and formal training in order to understand these patterns of success and failure in more depth. However, the biggest learning in his career, from the early stages all the way to today, has come and continues to come from mentors and coaches that have guided and inspired him to want more, go after more, and be more. He became a leadership coach because he knows that there's a better, you said better and faster way. That's the word, better and faster way
Yeah.
for aspiring leaders to fulfill their career ambitions and to truly become the leaders they want to be. That's why today he's on a mission to help as many aspiring leaders as he can to create the careers that they deserve. So for me, this is I would say like a big commitment and a mission, Peter. And so now, welcome. So I formally welcome to this life.
Thank you very much. And thanks also for doing it in English. It would be very, very shaky to do it in Spanish. So I appreciate that.
We can try someday.
No.
Okay, so I see that you repetitively use the word aspiring leaders. So it could be something minor, it could be obvious, but for me, it caught my attention. I would like to know, to be sure, what do you mean by aspiring leaders?
Yeah.
Because correct me if I'm wrong. So for me, this is kind of a starting point. So does aspiring refer to the initial state of for a leader looking for something else? I mean, not only in terms of the career growth, but in his life, her life. How do you recognize when a leader is an aspiring one?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it starts with the desire to actually want to become a leader, right? I think we use the term leader a lot of times interchangeably with a manager, director, or executive, vice president, whatever, right? But actually, just because you have the title doesn't make you a leader, right?
Exactly.
And equally, if you don't have anybody to manage directly, you can still be a leader. So this is really about a level of awareness where I'm saying, well, do you actually want to become a leader? As someone, and that it can be someone that's very early on in their leadership journey, or can be someone that's actually been in positions where they've been managing other people for a while, but don't really feel like they're actually leaders. They're kind of just been managing, but they haven't been leading. So it's less about the state of the person's career as it is about the stage that they're in terms of their leadership journey.
Got it. But what is exactly that they are missing?
Being a leader and feeling like they're a leader. So it's like we just said, right?
Influence in others, because you said it's more than a title. So
Yeah.
the influence in others.
Yeah. Well, it's the fact that when you're managing someone, that's one thing, and leaders have to manage people, right?
Yeah.
But when you're leading, people want to follow you, right?
Yeah.
And that's something different. So it's like this kind of almost a state of dissatisfaction to say, well, from my title, I'm a leader, but actually I don't see that people are following me. They're doing what I'm telling them, but they're not following me.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. Got it. So, so going back to our initial statement, when we mentioned that a profound, let's say, a profound and authentic behavior change takes longer. So I would like you to, kind of help us to understand if this is really a myth and or not, or is it is a reality. How is that? Is it possible to speed up the process? And I'm not talking only in terms of the velocity of the change, but in terms of the quality of a process, as you mentioned. So there is not only a faster way, but a better way too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's maybe just talk for a second about what's fast and what's slow, right? I think there are some people that think it takes years to change a belief or a behavior, right? And I actually think that you can change it in an instant. Now, the more deep-rooted the belief or the behavior is, generally speaking, the longer it will take to change it. But your ability to change a belief is directly correlated to your ability to accept a new belief. So let me just explain this from a personal example in my own life. Okay, so I grew up being surrounded by mostly people that worked in jobs where somebody else paid their salary. And so I grew up with the belief that in order to earn money, you had to get a job. It was only later on in life that I kind of got exposed to entrepreneurs and people actually running their own businesses, so paying their own salaries, if you will. And I'd always had a desire to start a business, but I, from a very early age, seen people work for others to earn money. So this belief was very much ingrained in me to say, you actually need a job to earn money. And I got exposed to lots of entrepreneurs over a 15-year period, but it never got to the point where I said to myself, okay, you can do it as well. It took me 15 years of seeing other people be entrepreneurs to say, okay, actually, I can do this too. What I've been believing for my entire life is actually wrong, because you have all these examples of other people that can do it. So it's really so evidence itself isn't enough, because I saw people that were doing it in a different way, but I still held on to my old belief because the belief was so entrenched. So that's why I said it's your ability to accept a new belief and act in accordance with that new belief that means it. Because honestly, if I see this, but then I see one person that does it in a different way, why doesn't that change my belief immediately? It doesn't change it because I've been seeing the other way over and over and over and over again in my environment through other people, right? So, and that's with anything. So it took me over a decade to accept the new belief, even though I had lots of evidence. So it's not the evidence, it's our ability to actually accept it. And how do we accept new beliefs? There are really two ways. One is repetition, where we just keep on impressing a new belief over and over into our mind, basically. And whether that's because we listen to somebody tell us, or because we tell ourselves that, or read it, whatever that is. Or there's emotional impact, where there's an event, either positive or negative, that kind of changes how we look at things in a very, and we have a lot of kind of negative examples to this. The example I often refer to as kind of a car crash. Someone walks away from a car crash, and you've probably heard this, they said, I look at life differently now because I've kind of, I see what I've not been doing. And so that changes the outlook on life in an instant, right? Yeah. And so it's really that spectrum, if you will, that makes it that we can either believe something really fast if we're able to accept it, or it takes us a very long time. And as we train ourselves to accept new beliefs and just accept them and not look at the opposite, what we've been believing, then we're able to actually accept new beliefs much faster, which then changes our behavior, which alters our results.
Got it. And I'm thinking, so definitely for some, I don't want to use the word easy, but so for some, for some probably is like they're more willing to make that change and than others, right? So how do you set up like the conditions to facilitate the change in others?
Absolutely, yeah, and I totally agree with you. There are essentially two prerequisites for change. One is, am I able, or are you able? And the other one is, are you willing? So actually, there's only one, because I believe we're pretty much able to do anything we want to. There's some things that are, from a physical point of view, are impossible, but pretty much anything we can do if we put our minds to it. So the question is, are you willing to do it? And that is, the question you have to answer. Now, how do you help someone? It's about leverage. So what's the leverage that they need within themselves to actually make that change? And we change for two reasons, really, fundamentally. If we look at it, we either do it because we're trying to avoid a pain, a negative situation, or we're seeking pleasure. We're looking for something positive. Now, we will typically do more to avoid pain than to seek pleasure. That's just how we're wired as human beings. From an evolutionary point of view, our brain's just wired that way to protect us from danger. So we'll do more to avoid pain. So, if let's say someone believes that they're not good at communicating, right? And then obviously that means that they're actually not good at communicating, because they keep on telling themselves they can't communicate well, which probably holds them back from becoming a leader of any type. right? Because communication is obviously fundamental to your ability to lead others, right? So the pain associated with keeping that belief is that you'll never become a leader. Now, and that's pretty strong leverage, right? If someone has a true desire, is emotionally connected to that desire to actually want to become a leader, yet this belief, true or not, is holding them back, then that's quite strong leverage to say, well, would you actually want to try on a different belief? And would you actually try to change your belief? So that's sort of the spectrum. It's avoid pain or seek pleasure. But clearly avoiding pain is what we're just conditioned to do more, and we'll do more to avoid pain and seek pleasure.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. And have you said that let's say, so I mean, if we consider your statement, right? So you help them to make that change in 6 months or less.
Mm-hmm.
Have you failed? I mean, that's your promise, right? So have you failed in that promise? If we can talk about your fail, their fail. So I mean, you know what I mean. So have you
Yeah.
failed? So at the end of the process, have you
No.
realized this? I mean, didn't happen in as fast, or as I promised, as I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, it happens faster than that, to be honest with you. So if the person actually wants to do it rarely takes 6 months. Like as in, it'll usually take weeks or a couple of months anyway. So if you will, if it doesn't work, is more of an issue of implementation and true willingness to do it.
Yeah.
Like I said, the only prerequisite really is willingness. So if when we also have to ask ourselves, what do we get from holding on to our old beliefs, right? And when you ask people that, they kind of are taken aback a bit, and they say, what do you mean? Because I don't like that belief. Yeah, but you're getting something from it that means you're holding on to it. And that typically is comfort. It's certainty that, well, yeah, I don't like the fact that I'm not good at communicating, but at least I know it to be true. And for me to actually try on a different belief would mean I'd have to step out of my comfort zone, which I'm actually not willing to do. So I would say that it always works if you're willing to have it work. But if you're not willing to do it, then yeah, that's kind of hard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can force them to.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's not my job.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you mentioned something around patterns that I mean, so for me, it's interesting to know a little bit more. So when you talk about those success and failure patterns that you started to notice across different countries.
Yeah.
Also, it would be interesting to know did you find some like differences geographically speaking. So tell us more about that journey and which ones were your insights.
Yeah, absolutely. So the patterns are just that, they're patterns, and they're not different across different geographies, at least not in my experience. They are expressed differently sometimes. Culturally, it makes sense that they might be expressed differently. Somebody in France may look at life very differently than someone in the States or in Norway or in Germany, for that matter. But generally speaking, the patterns are exactly that. So I study a lot of cross-cultural differences, and I use the word differences deliberately at university, and I actually wrote my master's thesis on it as well, because we tend to look at cultures from a perspective of what's different instead of what's the same. Mm-hmm. So we look at, well, what's different between Caroline and Peter because she's Mexican and he's German, right? Yeah. Well, yeah, probably some stuff, but actually a lot of it is very similar, right? So the patterns of success and failure, from my experience, and also reading other people's experiences and studying this topic, on a daily basis, they're actually the same. And it always starts out, the underlying, well, I guess the overarching is a better word. The overarching theme is that people know what they want. And I know that sounds really obvious, but if you were to go on the street and ask somebody, what's your goal for 2022? you would find that the vast majority of people wouldn't have a goal. So they don't know what they want. So that's number one. If you don't know what you want, how do you know you're going to get there? Because you don't know where you're going. It's like if you go on a road trip and you have no destination, well, wherever you're going to end up is where you're going to end up, right? And you've probably heard this. I've certainly had this in my life where someone said, well, how did you end up in this position in your career? And I said, I have no idea. I kind of fell into it, right? So that to me indicates that I didn't have a goal. I was just kind of going somewhere. And there's some merit in sort of being open to what comes. But at the same time, one of the clear indicators of success in people's lives is knowing where they're going. And that's different for everyone, right? So success also is a very personal definition of success, right?
Exactly.
I don't ever look at someone and say, you're a success, you're a failure. I look at, well, what's your definition of success, right? And if you are currently what you consider successful, that's amazing, right? That's all that matters. Because really, that understanding is also the fact that success is never where we end up, it's how we get there. That's success, right? So that's the first element. The first element is always, what do we want? And if you
Sorry to interrupt you, Peter.
no.
Before you continue, when you talk about, just I mean, you're talking about having a kind of a clear goal, a vision. When you work around that element, it is so how profound you go in terms of it's just only having a clear goal. This is what I want, and then you also go, in the why. So the purpose behind that.
It depends on the individual. For some people, that's important. For others, it's not, right? For me, it's important. Other people don't think it's important. So I don't impose, my view on that. I think it helps a lot to have a purpose. I think it helps like tremendously to know why you're doing something, especially because there'll be times when the manifestation of the purpose may not be exactly what you imagined, but you're in alignment, so it's okay. But I always encourage people to go that step farther and kind of look at that. But it's certainly not something that you have to have, in my opinion. I think it's very helpful.
Okay, got it. So please go on.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, so once you actually have a clear goal, and like I said, that's rare to find that. Whenever I meet someone that has a well-articulated goal, I congratulate them on it. I said, that's amazing that you know where you want to be, 5 years from now, or even a month from now, or 10 years from now, whatever the time horizons they've set for themselves, right? And then it's really about how constant improvement. And I don't say this from an energy of because I'm not good enough. I say this because we can always get better. So, I firmly believe that we have a lot of what we have inside of us will get us way further than we acknowledge. But I also believe it's important to keep on developing yourself. So to share a personal example again, I study every single day. And again, I do that to raise my awareness of certain subjects where I want to get better. I don't do it because I think I'm not good enough yet. I do it because I know there are always higher levels of awareness. And again, I see this with people. And again, it shows in different ways, right? Someone will go and they'll get lots of different degrees. They'll spend a lot of time in academia, which obviously raises your level of awareness. Other people, they read lots of books. Other people, they will, get coaches and they'll work with different coaches. Other people will do lots of training. So whatever that is, it doesn't really matter what it is. The point is that you do something that's deliberate, that you've chosen yourself, and that actually brings you forward. So I'm not talking about taking some sort of course that was mandated by your company. I'm talking about what you actually chose to do yourself because it brings you value in alignment with your goal, right? So it's this constant desire to improve because fundamentally that you have to grow as a human being. It's natural, right? We want to grow, and we see this in if you look at small children, if you look at babies, they're constantly looking for the next thing, right? They're constantly growing, and they don't accept failure. Like if you take, I think you have children, right? So if you think about the fact that when your children started walking, there was no moment when you said, okay, it's enough, right? Done. You're a crawler. That's it, right? I mean, you're not going to walk. No, they kept on going until they walked, right? And however many times they fell on their faces, right? And however many times they cried, they kept on getting up, right? So, and we shouldn't forget those lessons as adults, because it's just as true for adults, right? We just make the failure or the lack of success mean something so that we don't go back. But if we took this very childlike approach, we'd say, well, I learned something, right? Whatever I did, it didn't work out, but hey, there's definitely a lesson here. And this brings me to the next point, is this ability to reflect, right? The ability to really look yourself in the mirror, take personal responsibility for your actions and your results, and say, what can I do differently? What can I do better? Like the people in my experience, again, that are most successful, they take personal responsibility for their lives. They don't say, I couldn't do this because of the environment. They don't say, I couldn't do this because of the recession. They don't say this because I'm pink, black, blue, white, whatever it is, right? They just say, I created my circumstances. There's a great quote by Napoleon, and I don't love Napoleon for obvious reasons. He was quite a violent person that, was responsible for killing lots of people, but he did say, he said, circumstances, I make them. And that's so true. Fundamentally, we are in charge of creating the circumstances that we want in our life. So people that are successful, and again, people that fail, people that are successful, they take responsibility for their lives. But similarly, the people that don't achieve what they want, or don't achieve, they don't even know what they want to achieve, typically look outside of themselves for the reasons why they're not achieving whatever it is that they think they want, or think somebody thinks that they should do.
Okay. So you would say that, just, like summarizing what you were saying.
Yeah.
So there are two kind of key elements in those patterns that you have found. So one is to have a kind of a clear vision, a clear goal, or even a purpose, much better. So really understanding the why. And the second one is just to make sure that you have a progress, like a regular progress. So you have congruency between what you're saying you want to and your acting, right?
Yeah. And thirdly, your ability to self-reflect and gain self-awareness on a constant basis. And just take responsibility for your actions.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So, so you started to talk about circumstances, and I'm wondering, because also I'm sure, so some of your clients, if not the majority, I'm not sure, so comes from the corporate world. So from within organizations.
Yeah.
So if we think, so it is clear. So in terms of talking about the obstacles for making that kind of a real change. So you already talk about some of them that comes from within the individual, but thinking more broadly, so from organizations, is there something in the organizational environment, the culture, and so that could become an obstacle for that kind of a profound change that we are looking at in our leaders?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. I think, fundamentally, organizational change has to start at the top. It has to flow down. So if there's an unwillingness to change from the top, it's not going to happen. I think there is this idea that change can happen bottom up, and I think it can to a certain extent, but fundamental long-term change in organizations has to start at the top. It has to flow down, it has to filter down into the organization. It can originate anywhere in the organization, but unless there's very clear buy-in from the top that then filters it down into all parts of the organization, it's not going to really be profound and lasting. It's going to always be superficial. And even when it does come from the top, it can still be superficial because you haven't had the buy-in from everybody else. Yeah. So I think organizational circumstances are clearly very complex, as are our own circumstances, of course. So I won't stand here and say, forget about the organizational circumstances, but equally, you as an individual leader within your remit can still have an effect, no matter what, people in the organization think or don't think. So you've probably met people, and I certainly have, and I've been there myself, that said, I worked at an organization where I didn't appreciate the culture, but the reason I stayed a long time was because I had an amazing manager. So that's a clear example of someone that within their purview was able to create a great culture amongst a less good culture, let's just say it that way, right? So I believe the answer is yes, you can still make a change, you can still have an impact within your scope. Now, if you then say, can you as a manager or mid-level, even senior manager, affect organizational change in a large, Fortune 500 company on your own? Probably more difficult to do, unless you have some really clear support from the top of the organization.
Yeah, but I'm sure you have found those cases where, so you have, the leader, so the individual with the desire in place, and started to make some kind of real changes, but at the same time being stopped by some so let's say, I don't know, limitations, obstacles from the culture and the whole corporate environment. So how do you manage those cases?
Yeah, I think it's important for the individual to first of all define their own expectations for what's actually achievable. Now, I'm not a fan of saying realistic or unrealistic, but just in your own view of where you are, what does actually success look like in that scenario when you have those people and you can't get rid of the people, right? And I'm not saying you should get rid of the people, and you also can't really leave, or you don't want to leave, you actually want to stay there. Then actually define what that would look like for you. So if you're going to run it against the wall every time you talk to your boss about implementing some changes, then do what you can without talking to that boss. Do what you can within your own purview and define success as that, versus always looking, if only that person would support me, then I could do this. Because this if-then thinking typically doesn't help us in achieving what we want, because we're relying on other people outside of our control, and what really only we can control is our own remit, or what we can do ourselves. So I think it's important then to understand, what can I do? And at the same time, though, how might I influence those people, right? Because again, what I said at the beginning, it's the same for everyone, pain or pleasure, right? So if you can show very clearly why this change would actually be beneficial to the department, to the company, whatever size of the organization we're talking about, even though this person is against it fundamentally, but if you can make a clear enough case that talks both about avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, it's probably unlikely that you run to someone that would still stop you, because you'll make it better for them as well. So if you're able to, let's say, increase retention, so avoid the pain of hiring again, and drive more sales, seeking pleasure, it's probably unlikely that somebody would say, no, I don't want that. They might not agree with the method, but you can make a clear enough case to actually help them see that what you're saying is good. So again, whatever you use for yourself to drive change, you can also help others see it that way. You just have to present it in a way that the brain understands it.
Yeah, totally agree. And of course, so if at the end of a way, so you realize that you are in the middle of a culture that is actually stopping you from being who you want to be, or to reach what you want to reach, so you have to leave, right?
I don't disagree with that. I think sometimes there are environments where you shouldn't be in. And I think just on that topic, though, what I've seen is that people then make it mean that they are a failure, that they didn't succeed in that role. And I always say, well, hang on a second. What were you responsible for? What was it that you could influence reasonably, and what was clearly out of your control? Like, if you're the only person that cares about something that you feel is really valuable, but nobody else cares, well, what were your chances if you're not in a position of authority with that group of people? So then don't go away and think, okay, well, I failed again, yet another job where I didn't succeed. But just look at what you did well, and also just, if nothing else, understand that you actually took a stance for what you believe in. And that's also, one of the highest human needs we have, is the fact that we need to stay congruent with ourselves. And exactly. So you've done that, and that's not failure in my mind anyway. And so if the person wants to make that mean failure, that's within their responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So Peter, one of the things that I really like when I hold these conversations in the podcast is not only focus on not only provide information, but also go deeper in terms of showing like pragmatical things,
Mhm.
evidences, some things that whoever is looking or listening at us
Hmm.
is able to really understand how they can like turn these situations into whatever they are looking for in their life. So I would like to like go much more specific in terms of if you can provide an example of a real coaching process where a leader is aiming a specific goal, a specific change.
Sure.
What are like in terms of the stages, techniques, if you can say so, you use the timing, the outcomes, and so.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a great process I'd like to share with people, and I think it's also great for self-coaching, is this concept of habits and the habit loop. You may have heard of it. There's a great book. I forgot the name of it right now. The author is Charles Duhigg. I think it's called The Power of Habit, actually, the book. So basically, what I said before, when we're talking about behavior, the majority of our behavior is actually habitual, the vast majority of it. And that's just because our brain can't handle that many decisions. So we just run patterns all the time, right? And now I'm not saying that everyone's life is the same, but fundamentally we react to this similar situations in the same way. So there's a great way that's illustrated in this book. It's called the habit loop. So it's basically 3 stages of a habit. It's cue, routine, and reward. So the cue is basically the trigger. So let's take an example of someone that is confronted with people that don't communicate well to them. Okay, so let's say the cue would be someone comes to you and they make some snide remark or make some unprofessional comment. The routine is then you might actually defend yourself, or you might talk back at them, and you'd feel, and then the reward would be that you feel vindicated because you stood your ground and you didn't take that from that person. So that's kind of a pattern that you'd run. And whenever somebody talks to you in a disrespectful manner or does something that you don't like, you'll kind of run that same habit loop, which is the routine element of that. So another way to look at this is you say, well, this clearly isn't leading to good results for me. Me kind of talking back at people and not really understanding where they're coming from isn't helping me, right? Like it's not making the situation better. I feel like I have the moral high ground afterwards, but I don't get anything else from it. Like I'm not resolving anything. We're not better off. We go apart and both of us feel misunderstood, right? So you might then decide to actually change that pattern, that habit. And what you would do is you take the routine element and you basically take that element out, throw it away, and put in a new one, right? So next time someone talks to you in a meeting and says, what a stupid idea, instead of saying, I haven't seen you come up with anything better, you might actually say, well, how could I use this negative energy in a positive way? So you might actually change the habit by saying, next time somebody makes a statement like that, I'm going to ask them, I'm going to try to understand them further. So you might say, okay, thanks for your comment. Why do you think it's a stupid idea? And all of a sudden, you engage in that person. Now, the reward you get is still the moral high ground because you haven't agreed with them. You haven't kind of made it okay to behave this way, but you've actually engaged them. So now you might actually get a different outcome. So, and this response that we give to people when they're behaving in ways that we don't like is a habit. So this is the way to change it. So basically, all it takes is that you start becoming more self-aware. So you look at areas of your life where you're getting the results that you don't want currently. And you start really focusing on, you can do this with a larger habit or you can do it with a smaller habit, right? Like, why can I never go to the gym, right? For example, well, maybe it's because you don't set your alarm early enough to be able to do it before you go to work, right? That's an easy fix. But if we take the example that I just mentioned, right? You really go through your day and look at, well, where am I getting good results, right? Where am I having trouble with people, or where am I having, like, with superiors or peers, or where is my team not responding well to me? And understand that, because a lot of what people do, and I'm not going to exclude myself from this, is we react to our outside, our external environment, and that habit that we then run is that reaction to it. So we can just as easily change it by just simply take, like I said, you think of it like a cassette tape. If you're old enough, you remember those. Those tapes you put in a cassette player, right? And why am I saying replacing it? Because if you try to force something else, if you try to fight it, you're just going to get all messed up. So it's like if you try to record over one of those cassette tapes, where something was on there, you could kind of do it, but it was weird. I don't know if you remember this. You tried to record over one, there was something on, and it just sounded strange, right? There was something from the old one, something from the new one. So that doesn't work. So you have to take it out, throw it away, and put in a fresh tape with a new routine, and run that routine only. So and just remind yourself, and just don't do too many habits. Do one or two max. I would just recommend start with one, because you build a muscle. It's like building a muscle, right? You'll understand this. So next time somebody talks to you in that way, you'll just say, oh, okay, different routine. How can I engage with this person? How can I get something resourceful from this conversation? Where before would have both walked away thinking, well, that was a waste of time. Now actually I'm engaging with this person. And maybe next time they won't say it was a stupid idea. They'll actually say, well, do you mind if I just share my opinion about this? Because they actually felt somebody was listening to them. They may have just been angry. They may have just had a bad day. Who knows, right? So we're changing our approach, doing what's in our power. Doesn't matter how the other person reacts, but we've done it in a more resourceful way. So that's something I recommend. I love it. It's so simplistic, but yet it's so true. And if we look at our life through that lens of the habit loop, it's absolutely true. And so it's a great way to kind of self-coach yourself and start changing some behaviors, or even some beliefs, right? Because beliefs are the same way. We get an external cue and it triggers a belief, right? I could never do that. Oh, if only I had more time, and all those things. Well, why don't you have more time, right? You have time to do these other things. So why not that?
Yeah. And so from your experience, so how long does it take to install a new habit?
Yeah. So honestly, it really varies based on the person and the habit. And I've also read a lot of research on this, right? And there's some people that say 6 days, and other people say 90 days, and everything in between. So I've seen it within a week. I've seen it within a month. It really varies, because sometimes the behavior is also very entrenched, right?
Yeah.
Like the example I just mentioned, if you work in an environment where people aren't very professional or very courteous, you're constantly getting bombarded with this, and you're just sick of it. So to be able to change it might take longer than if it only happens once in a while, right? So it kind of varies. From my experience, there is no hard and fast rule. I'm not going to tell you it takes 21 days, and if it's not enough 21 days, then forget it, doesn't work. No, it doesn't. That's not. You have to kind of But people, if you do a Google search on this, you'll get all kinds of answers, right? So my answer is, it really depends, but you just have to keep on going, because I know it's possible to change it. It's always possible to do it. You just have to be willing to try it for as long as it takes.
Got it. And I totally understand what you're saying, and I agree. But I have to force you to give an answer. So typically, let's say so what's the average? So the range. So just, so for the ones that are listening you, just to have an idea.
No, like I said, I think I don't think it's ever more than a month. I can't think of an example where it was more than a month, to be honest with you. But still, I say that, but I'm going to say because it doesn't matter if it takes you 60 days, it's going to take 60 days. And the worst thing you can do is stop and say whatever this guy said doesn't work. No, it works. You just have to keep on doing it, right? It's, again, example with your children. They didn't stop to try to walk. They did it, right? It worked eventually. Yeah. It may have taken longer than you wanted them, and for them, definitely, because they didn't want to fall on their face all the time, but they did it. So, whatever number I tell you, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you don't stop, that you keep on going.
Yeah, I get it. And talking about that, let's say sustainability of a change. So, so what are those evidences that you have or the coachee has? So in terms of, when he or she can say, I know that this is already, or I already changed this belief, or
Yeah.
I already adopt a new
Yeah.
behavior, or this is really part of me now.
Yeah.
So what are those signs or evidences?
Yeah. I mean, the evidence is literally in the change in behavior. So I have people come to me and say, I've actually had this conversation in a different manner, like we discussed, where I actually went to someone and offered help versus waiting for people to come to me, and I see now how that's different, right? People come with all kinds of things, right? Some people, they come to me and say, I can't speak in public, and then I found out they've been doing public speaking for 15 years, but they just have a couple of things they need to change, right? And then you change those different patterns, and all of a sudden they're great again. So it's always that evidence that you actually see it happening, and you also feel it. You feel it when the change is more real versus when it's kind of mechanical, because initially it'll feel a bit forced to change a belief, like I just mentioned, right? It'll feel kind of like, well, okay, so I'm going to ask this question now, but I still think I should tell the person that they're an idiot. All right. So you have to keep on doing that. You have to just keep on telling yourself, because you also have to then see the result for yourself, not how the person responds. That is irrelevant, right? Because it doesn't matter. What's important is that you still get the same reward by employing a different pattern, which is more resourceful. So I just see it because people say they've noticed it either in themselves or other people reflect it back to them as well, which I think is also great. I always prefer it when they see it themselves, because that self-awareness is better than, well, better is not necessarily better, but it's stronger when you see it yourself versus when somebody reflects it back to you. But at the same time, it's also good when people reflect it back to you, because oftentimes, high achievers are pretty hard on themselves, so they don't necessarily see the improvements that they make. So, which is also why people come to a coach, because the coach is able to tell them, no, you're changing. Fundamentally, I see the change in you, because I see the change in people as well, and I definitely share that. And luckily, I'm in the position to give people that, validation, because I'm clearly there for the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to make my own assumptions. So I want to ask you in terms
Yeah,
of, yeah, because I mean, I have my, my mindset and
of
my
course.
framework in my son. So for you, this is kind of a linear process, or it's a process where there are like back and forth. So how do you see that, the evolution?
Yeah, it's definitely not linear. No, 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 absolutely not. I mean, I think change is rarely linear. I think we've probably all seen these kind of great
An
diagrams.
algorithm.
Yeah, I think we've seen the theory of change, and then we've seen the reality of change, right?
Yeah.
So I was just talking to somebody, so a client of mine this morning, and I was saying to her, what you're doing right now might not seem like it's in pursuit of your goal. So we could call it a detour, but you're still moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going backwards, you're still moving forward. But if you would draw it out, it would seem like a massive detour, right? And that happens, I think, a lot of times. Again, it's about this ability to stick with it and the willingness to actually change. I Yeah, so it's definitely not a linear process by any means.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to check that.
Yeah.
Your point of view,
Yeah.
of course. So Peter, so we have like a little bit more than 10 minutes. So, and I would love to hear your perspective in terms of so talking about human-centric organization, which
Mhm.
is like really like how do you say, we used to hear that common frequently. Um, so from your point of view, what would you say are the main leadership change or leadership shifts that we expect to see in terms of leadership in organizations? What are the main shifts?
Yeah. I think the first thing is that people actually care about the people that work for them. I think that's a big thing. I've seen a lot in my own experience, like as an employee, but also working with people, that there's still a lot of people in leadership positions that don't really care about the people that work for them.
Mhm.
Um, and then I always kind of wonder why you're there. But so I think fundamentally And I wouldn't necessarily call it the caring leader. I just say the person that cares about others, I think is something that we're seeing more of already. And I don't see that trend reversing. Actually, I see it accelerating. I see the person that, it actually is more there to enable their employees than anything else. I think that's again, I was just talking to someone earlier today, who leads a larger team in a multinational, and we're talking about this actually being fundamentally what you are there for, is to make the people around you better. So I think that's the thing that I really see happening. I also see leadership as a discipline versus just the byproduct of a career progression. So if you will, typically we become leaders because we're really good at what we do. Typically the expert becomes the manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if they keep on being expert, then they become director, and so on and so forth, right? But I actually see that with the incredibly rapid development of skills and changes in technology that we're experiencing all the time, and it's just going to keep on becoming more and more, right? I don't think the change is decreasing by any means. I think it's just going to accelerate more. You're going to have people that are deep technical experts in whatever it is that they do, and then you're going to have people that are actually leading as a discipline, as an actual craft.
Yeah.
So I see that definitely happening. And I also see, and thank God I see that more and more already, this shift away from the command and control leader and really to the person just enabling, kind of just what can I do for you versus these are the 5 things you have to do today. And don't get me wrong, I believe managing will always stay part of a leader's role.
Yeah.
So that certain task allocation, making decisions, right? That is going to continue to be the role. And I think it's fundamentally misguided to think that people are just going to decide for themselves. Because also especially in large organizations, how do you make sure that actually what you want to achieve at the top filters down if everybody just kind of does what they want?
Yeah. Going from like executing, micromanaging to empowering others.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I see that, and like I said, thankfully I see that, especially with the people I work with more and more, and I guess also because I resonate with that myself, that's a shift that's been happening, and I think it keeps on happening, and that's a very good thing. And also I think looking at the next generation that's coming in the workforce, they also have no tolerance for being micromanaged from a lot of people, and I think that acknowledgement that there is a very clear generational shift in people's expectations, just we have to acknowledge it, right? It doesn't matter whether we agree with it or not. Like it's fundamentally irrelevant whether someone dislikes, how people in their 20s operate. It doesn't matter. They're the future workforce. So you're going to have to understand them and speak to them the way they want to be spoken to a certain degree, right? And because fundamentally, if you're the leader, you're there to get the best out of people, and that starts with communicating to them in the way that works for them, to a degree, right?
Yeah.
So those are some of the bigger things I see kind of taking place, and just I think in general I've seen this more and more that what I mentioned, this caring leader, but actually that people are much more concerned about culture. But we've been talking about culture for years, and this, with your background, obviously. But from my point of view, it was sort of just talked about and not lived. And now I see it being lived. And so that is, from my point of view, a positive thing, because if we actually intentionally shape a culture, which we can do, culture is constantly evolving, so therefore we can shape it, and then we should also intentionally shape a positive culture and actually live by that culture versus just talk about it once a year or in some meeting that everybody attends, but actually act in accordance as well.
Yeah. So I would like to hear your opinion in terms of, so probably going back to your first point in terms of caring others. So one of one of the areas where I used to work a lot is in terms of building high performing teams. So one of the protocol or the elements that we actually is the first one, the one when we start the process, is I call it connectivity. It is related to personal connection. So this idea of like have a fine line between your personal life, your professional life is such a lie. And so you are just a human being. And at the contrary, so the idea when working in a team is to really know each other, but much, beyond that, the title, beyond your name. So just really know who you are, where you're coming from, who's your family, what are your fears, what do you feel proud of, or etc. So yeah, I'm not saying like being friends, why not, but I'm not referring to that, but really make that strong personal connection. So would you say that goes into the first thing that you mentioned in terms of caring, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm in two minds about this. So I get it, and I've always tried to get to know everyone I work with. Um, but at the same time, I also think it's important to respect people's boundaries. So some people, they come to work and they're there to work, and they don't want to share anything, and I don't. And I also think it's important to respect that and say this person, has a clear separation. Now, I'm with you. I don't believe that there is such a thing as a separation like that. I think, yes, we might put on a different hat when we're in the office, but fundamentally, I'm Peter now, and I'm Peter in 2 hours from now, when I'm sitting down with my wife. So I'm not fundamentally changing as a human being, but I think it's important to also give people the choice whether they want that or not. If I don't want to talk about my family, at work, then that should be respected. And equally, if I want to talk about family, that should also be fine. I think, when it comes to talking about your ambitions, your fears, your weaknesses, that's all great as long as you're in a safe environment where that's actually it's okay to say that, right? I think and I've seen it, and you probably have as well. People open up, and then actually it gets used against them. Well, we'd consider you for a promotion, but you know yourself that you're weak in these areas. So, I mean, come on, that wasn't the point of self-awareness, right? The point of self-awareness wasn't to put it back in somebody's face. The point of self-awareness was to say, oh, great, this person actually understands what they need to do. Now, what can we do to help them to overcome those things, right? So I think fundamentally, I totally agree with you. I just think that it has to be done in a way where it's okay to be vulnerable, like actually okay. And that usually starts at the top, right? It has to be, if we see our manager or our manager's manager actually being that open and vulnerable, and that's okay, and they're getting promoted or they're getting bigger opportunities in the company, whatever that is, then that sends the right message. But this, for me, if it starts at the bottom, there's a level of uncertainty. What will happen with that information? Will that go into my HR file? Will my manager hold that against me one more time? So yeah, I think it's a great development, because like you say, I mean, it's been a bit of a shift now because a lot of us work remotely at least part of the time. So we still spend more time at home now, but we used to, hard to remember, we used to spend more time at the office than at home, right? So yeah, and we still spend more time at work, like mentally at work, than we do at home. So it's important that we can show up in the way that we're most comfortable.
Yeah, you're right. And I have an idea, like jumping in my mind, if this is probably like related to any cultural thing, because probably in I'm not sure, probably this is a generalization, so I'm not sure. So probably in Latin America, we are like more used to talk about us as in terms of our more personal things, more intimacy at work than in Europe, for example, right? So, but yeah, you're right. So you are right in what you're saying. So we need to be like just conscious that not everyone is willing to open at that level. We need to first create, like, the conditions, the safe a safe environment to just to go that beyond.
100%. And I think, especially when we're talking about multinational organizations, we definitely need to also be mindful of those cultural differences because they do exist. So I remember, and I'll share, I know we're at the end of our time almost, but I'll share this example because I think it's going to be interesting for people. So I used to work for a British company. At the end of my time, I was based in Germany. So I think there were 5 or 6 of us that went from Germany, all Germans, all German men. And we went to this team building event in the UK. Now, in the UK, they're quite open to kind of making fun of themselves and that sort of thing. That's very culturally acceptable. In Germany, not at all, especially not at work. So there were a number of exercises we did, and I ended up, having to write a rap song with my boss, who was in his late 50s, and then having to perform it in front of the entire group. And so that was something where I look back, and the Brits, they enjoyed it tremendously, and they all thought it was great. And he and I were, back from that and thought, never again. Never again. So you have to be mindful that there are, especially in Europe, we're one continent, but we're 30 different countries, whatever it is, but even more cultures within those continents. So there are vast differences. From my time certainly in Norway and in France, fundamentally different. And even Germany and France, very, very different. Now we get along great, but very different cultural expressions. So there are things you have to be mindful of, especially when you have, these multicultural teams, that what's acceptable for one culture may be kind of a hard thing, for other cultures. And that I've never shared that story publicly. So there you go. It's been therapeutic now. It's good. It's been so many years. I can talk about it now.
Okay, but it's totally true. Yeah. I agree. And so we are closing to the end, and there's one more question I want to ask you is, so for those that are probably watching us, or we'll see that later. So if they are like, people with a strong desire of change, let's say with a clear vision or goal, that they are not guided by a professional coach, they are doing it by themselves. So you already mentioned something like that, but I would like to, what are those recommendations you can provide to them?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's great. So totally, if you want to go it yourself, I think fundamentally for me, there's the kind of 3 ways I look at how you constantly develop yourself, or 3 elements of that. The first element is immersion. So you have to take time, I'd recommend you take time throughout the year to immerse yourself in a certain topic, right? So when I say immersion, I'm talking about like a training, like a multi-day training, for example, or a workshop, or even something you guide yourself, where you lock yourself away and just really focus on a topic. So you get, you're starting to master something, and that's whatever that is in your field, right? I don't know. It depends on the person, whether you want to do something on leadership or something specific that's more of a technical skill, that's maybe HR related, or something coding, whatever is your profession, right? So that really several times throughout the year, you immerse yourself in some of those things, so that you're really speeding up the process of acquiring new knowledge. And then obviously you have to apply it as well, right? The next thing then is repetition. So like I mentioned, I study every day. Now I study the same things for several days in a row. And why do I do that? Because I know that my brain shuts off sometimes when I'm hearing something, and I entertain the idea, and then it's been 2 minutes and I keep on listening. And then the next day I listen to it again. I was like, oh, I never heard that. So that's why I use repetition. Okay.
Great to hear that, because every time that I do that, I think this is so inefficient. It's what my saboteur is telling me,
Great. It's great. So, I was doing this morning, and I was comparing the notes I took from yesterday and today. And today my notes were twice as long than yesterday's, because I was just hearing more, same content, right? So, and then the third element is, you want to model people. So if you don't want to work with a coach or a mentor or whatever, that's completely fine, but you still want to take some people that you want to model. And I'm not saying become those people, don't impersonate the person, but just look at, if you have someone that you like, maybe if you personally know them, it's even better because you can observe them more closely. And you say, I really like how this person, talks to others. I like how they communicate things. I like how they handle conflict. I like how they give feedback. I like how self-aware they are, whatever that is. And model that particular behavior from that person. Because if we see it lived by somebody else, then we can look at that and make it our own. So immerse, repeat, and model. And those 3 steps for me, I use those all the time. And so I immerse once a quarter, 4, 5, 6 days, whatever that is. I just really immerse in a subject. And then, like I said, study every day, and then also modeling the people that I want to take something from in a particular area that I want to work on. And when you do those things, you're constantly developing, you're building momentum, and you're obviously you have to apply whatever you're learning, right? I know it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but if knowledge isn't power, knowledge is potential power. So only when it's applied does it become powerful. So we have to, whatever it is that we're reading or learning, whatever, we need to also use it. Otherwise, it doesn't serve us much, right? So if you pick up a book and there's one great idea in that book, maybe it's the first chapter, and that's all you wanted from it, then at least apply that idea. You don't have to read the rest of the book, but make sure you apply that one idea, right? So those 3 steps: immerse, repeat, and model.
Awesome. So clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so for those who want to contact you after, so where they can find you?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, Peter Karius, Peter, P-E-T-E-R, and my last name is K-A-R-I-U-S. That's just on LinkedIn, or my website is peterkarius.com. So those 2 places are the easiest to find me. Well. Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So something that you want to say before saying goodbye?
I would just say, for anyone that wants to develop, become a leader, set a goal, set a true goal that you actually care about, right? And I want to just say, when I say you care about, I really mean you. I don't mean what your spouse thinks. I don't mean what your manager thinks. I don't mean what your parents think is good. And I also don't mean what your kids think is good. I mean what you actually want.
Even what is socially expected. So
yeah, exactly. So I really set a goal that you care about, that inspires you, and that you believe it's going to still inspire you going forward. And by the way, there's no shame in changing your goal. Just don't change it because you haven't achieved it. If you haven't achieved it, set it again, do it again until you achieve it. Yeah. But really, when I talk about goal setting, I really mean a goal you want. Doesn't matter what anybody else wants. Set that goal. And if it's something that's way out there, don't talk to anybody about it. That's fine. Because what's going to happen is people are going to tell you why you can't do it. You don't need to hear this. You just need to believe that you can do it. And one day you will. So that's my final piece of advice.
Yeah, awesome. And actually, if you work in something that you really want to change, so the probability of succeed is much higher.
100%.
Absolutely. Yeah. So great. It was so pleasure to me, Peter, to have you here to hold this conversation. I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I hope to have you again in another episode. So I will find another topic to talk. So probably about golf or something.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Carla. I appreciate it. And thanks again for doing it in English.
No, pleasure. So I know the majority of your audience is English spoken. So it was good. It was a good exercise for me as well. I enjoy it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. See you soon in another episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.